Chapter 41. The Apology. The roar of the Atlantic Ocean was the only sound that mattered now. We had left the city 3 hours ago, escaping the sirens, the flashbulbs, and the suffocating weight of 1,000 questions. Alexander hadn't spoken a word since we crossed the Montauk line. He sat in the passenger seat of the SUV, his head leaned back against the leather, his eyes closed. He looked like a man who had finally run out of air. I pulled the car into the gravel driveway of the stone house on the cliff. The same house where we had shared a brief, stolen peace before his mother arrived. The same house where the fire of Act II had truly begun. I turned off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. "We're here, Alexander," I said softly. He didn't move for a long moment. Then he opened his eyes. They weren't the eyes of the billionaire boss. They weren't even the eyes of the man who had just faced a federal cell. They were hollow, haunted by the realization that his entire life had been built on a foundation of theft and that his latest attempt to save me had almost cost him my soul. "I don't know if I can go inside," he whispered, his voice a jagged wreckage of itself. "Why?" "Because that house is full of ghosts, Maya. My father's mine, the man who bought your father's company, the man who wrote that contract." He turned to look at me, and I saw a tremor in his hand that he couldn't hide. "I look at you, and I see everything I've done wrong. Every strategy, every lie, every locked-in clause." I reached over and took his hand, my fingers interlacing with his. "Then we don't go in as the Blackwoods or the Sterlings. We go in as us, just us." I led him into the house. It was cold, the air smelling of salt and cedar. I didn't turn on the lights. The moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows provided a silver path across the hardwood. Alexander didn't go to the bedroom. He went to the stone fireplace and sat on the hearth, his head in his hands. He looked small. For the first time since I had met him, the space around him didn't feel like it was under his command. I walked into the kitchen, made a pot of tea, and brought 2 mugs over. I sat on the floor at his feet, leaning my back against his knees. We stayed like that for a long time, watching the moon reflect on the dark, churning water outside. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were so quiet I almost missed them. They weren't the loud, public declaration he'd made at the plaza. They weren't the calculated apology he'd given at the Savoy. This was different. This was the sound of a man finally breaking. "For which part?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "For thinking I could own you," he said. He leaned forward, his hands dropping from his face to my shoulders. "I sat in that cell today, Maya, and all I could think about was that first night. I remembered the way you looked in that green dress. I remembered the desperation in your eyes, and I remembered the exact moment I realized I could use it to keep you." He let out a shaky breath. "I told myself I was being a businessman. I told myself I was securing a future for the company. But the truth is, I was just a coward who didn't know how to ask a woman to stay, so I tried to make it illegal for her to leave." Alexander POV. The tea was cold in my hand, but I couldn't drink it. My throat felt like it was filled with glass. I had spent my life believing that an apology was a sign of weakness, a concession given to someone who had managed to outmaneuver you. But as I looked down at the top of Maya's head, at the dark silk of her hair, I realized that my silence had been the greatest weakness of all. "I'm sorry for the Icarus Protocol," I continued, the words pouring out of me now like blood from a wound. "I'm sorry for lying to you in the lab. I'm sorry for telling you I used you. I thought if I made you hate me, the fallout wouldn't touch you. I thought I could be the only one who burned." I felt Maya shift against my knees. She turned around so she was facing me, her hazel eyes searching mine in the silver light. "You thought you could control the fire, Alexander," she said. "You still don't get it. A partnership isn't about who takes the hit. It's about holding the shield together." "I don't know how to be a partner, Maya. I was raised to be a master. Every relationship I saw growing up was a transaction. My mother, my father, they didn't love each other. They managed each other. And I did the same to you." I reached out, my thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I'm sorry for the locked-in claws. I'm sorry for the way I looked at you like an asset. I'm sorry for the weeks I spent trying to find the back door to your heart instead of just opening mine." I felt a tear escape, hot and humiliating, and I didn't wipe it away. "I don't deserve the room, Maya, and I certainly don't deserve you." Maya reached up and wiped the tear with her thumb. She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with a fierce, beautiful clarity that made my heart ache. "You're right," she said. "You don't deserve me, not the man you were a month ago. That man was a monster who used a pen like a scalpel." I flinched, but she didn't stop. "But the man standing in the rain, the man who resigned to save my father, the man who sat in a cell so I could be free, that man is the only one I want." She stood up, pulling me with her. The distance between us vanished. The smell of her, jasmine and salt, filled my senses, drowning out the coldness of the night. "The apology is accepted, Alexander," she whispered, her lips inches from mine. "But only if you promise one thing." "Anything." "No more martyrs. If we lose the room, we lose it together. If we burn together." "I promise," I rasped. I kissed her then, a slow, deep, and agonizingly tender kiss that was more of a vow than any contract I had ever signed. This wasn't the kiss of a conqueror. It was the kiss of a man who had finally found his way home. Maya POV. The reconciliation was more than emotional. It was a reclamation of our bodies, our space, and our future. As Alexander led me toward the bedroom, the fallout of Act I felt like a distant storm. We moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if we were learning each other for the first time. The suits, the titles, the billions of dollars, they were all discarded on the floor, leaving us as nothing more than a man and a woman in the dark. He touched me with a reverence that made my breath hitch. He kissed every inch of me, his mouth tracing the history of our month together, the places where I had resisted him, the places where I had surrendered, and the places where we had finally met as equals. In the bed, with the sound of the ocean below us, Alexander finally let go of the steward. He stopped managing the moment and started living it. He was raw, unshielded, and desperately hungry for a connection that had nothing to do with power. "I love you," he gasped as we moved together, his voice echoing in the silence of the room. "I love you, Maya Sterling, more than the tower, more than the name." "I know," I whispered, my fingers digging into his back. "I love you too." As the first light of dawn began to touch the windows, I realized that the fallout had finally settled. We had survived the fire, the lies, and the secrets. We had dismantled the cage and found that the world outside was huge and terrifying and beautiful, and we were ready to claim it. Alexander POV, 6 a.m. I woke up to the smell of coffee. The room was filled with the soft, golden light of a Hamptons morning. I stayed in bed for a moment, listening to the birds and the waves. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to check the clock. I didn't feel the weight of the room. I looked at the pillow beside me. It was empty, but the scent of jasmine was still there. I got out of bed, pulled on a pair of dark trousers, and walked into the living room. Maya was standing on the deck, a mug in her hand, looking out at the horizon. She was wearing one of my white shirts, the sleeves rolled up, her hair loose in the wind. She looked like a queen. I walked up behind her and wrapped my arms around her waist, pulling her back against my chest. She leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. "The board called," she said, not looking back. I felt a ghost of the old tension, but I didn't let go. And they've officially ratified the Sterling Blackwood Foundation. The Tokyo contracts have been voided by the UN. We're in the clear, Alexander. The science is safe. The legacy is ours. I kissed the top of her head. "It's your legacy, Maya. I'm just the consultant, remember?" "No," she said, turning in my arms. She reached into the pocket of the shirt and pulled out the small velvet box. She opened it, revealing the new gold band we had picked out in Zurich. "You're my partner, and I think it's time we made it official. Not for the press, not for the board, for us." I looked at the ring, then at her. My heart was thudding a slow, heavy rhythm of peace. "I thought you'd never ask," I teased. She laughed, a rich, happy sound that made the morning feel perfect. She took my hand and slid the ring onto my finger. It was a solid, grounding weight. "The locked-in era is over, Alexander," she said, her eyes flashing with that familiar, beautiful fire. "But the claim is just beginning." "I'm ready," I said, pulling her into a kiss. Maya POV. We spent the day on the beach. We didn't talk about the SEC or the media. We talked about the future. We talked about moving the lab to the Hamptons, about building a research center that was focused on healing, not weaponization. We talked about my father coming to live with us. For the first time, we weren't building an empire. We were building a life. But as the sun began to set, casting long, orange shadows across the sand, a black SUV pulled into the driveway at the top of the cliff. I felt Alexander's grip on my hand tighten. We both stood up, watching the car. "It's not my mother," Alexander said, his voice returning to that lethal, protective rasp. "And it's not Marcus." A man stepped out of the car. He was older, wearing a sharp suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. "Who is he?" I asked. "He's the executor of my father's secret estate," Alexander whispered, his face going pale. "The one Arthur hid from my mother. The one he said would only be opened when the steward finally found his soul." The man walked down the path toward the beach. He stopped 10 feet away and tipped his hat. "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Sterling." "What do you want, Mr. Vance?" Alexander asked. "I'm here to deliver the final clause of the Sterling Blackwood agreement," the man said, reaching into his briefcase. "The one your father signed in 1996, the one he knew you'd need today." He handed a single, sealed envelope to Alexander. "The fallout isn't over, Alexander," the man said softly. "It's just moving into the third dimension." He turned and walked back toward the car, leaving us alone in the fading light. Alexander POV. I looked at the envelope. My name was written on the front in my father's sharp, decisive hand. I felt a surge of dread. My father had been a thief, but he had also been a man who thought 20 steps ahead of everyone else. If he had left a message for me, it wasn't a blessing. It was a warning. "Open it," Maya said, her hand on my arm. I tore open the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small, silver key. I read the letter. Alexander. "If you are reading this, it means you have done what I could not. You have found a woman who is stronger than the name, and you have realized that the room isn't worth owning if it's empty." But the Sterling IP was never just a mapping algorithm. It was a map to something else. The fourth factor wasn't a flaw in the science, it was a security gate. The key in this envelope opens a vault in the mountains of Switzerland. Inside, you will find the reason I really stole the company. And the reason you must never let the world see what's coming next. Protect her, Alexander, not from the press, from the truth. I looked at the silver key in my hand. It was cold. What does it say? Maya asked, her eyes searching mine. I looked at her, the woman I had just apologized to, the woman I had promised to share everything with. I saw the trust in her eyes, the love that had cost us both so much. I looked at the letter again. Protect her. From the truth. The fallout was entering a new, terrifying phase. My father's secrets weren't just about theft anymore. They were about the very nature of the science Maya had just launched to the world. I had a choice. I could be the partner I promised to be and show her the letter. Or I could be the steward one last time and burn it. I looked at the fire in Maya's eyes. I reached out and handed her the letter. No more secrets, I said, my voice steady. No matter what's in that mountain. Maya read the letter. I watched her face go from confusion to realization to a cold, clinical horror. She looked at the key, then at me. Alexander, she whispered, if this is what I think it is, the mapping isn't just a cure, it's a bridge to something else. Then we go to Switzerland, I said, taking the key. We find the vault, and we show the world that a Blackwood and a Sterling can do more than just survive the fallout. We can end it, she said. The apology was over. The claim was beginning. And as the moon rose over the Atlantic, casting a long, silver path across the water, I realized that we weren't just two people in a house anymore. We were the architects of a new reality. And the world was about to find out exactly what happens when you try to lock in the truth. Maya POV, end of chapter 41. I sat on the deck, the letter in my lap. The apology had been beautiful. The reconciliation had been perfect. But as I looked at the silver key, I realized that Alexander was right. The fallout wasn't a tragedy. It was a transformation. I looked at Alexander, who was standing by the railing, looking out at the dark sea. He was no longer the billionaire or the monster. He was my husband-to-be, my partner, my wall. Alexander. I called out. He turned. Yes. Don't ever apologize for being you again. The world needs a man who isn't afraid of the dark. He smiled, a slow, dark, and incredibly dangerous smile. Deal. We walked back into the house, leaving the ocean behind. The locked-in era was finally, truly over, but the Sterling Blackwood era, that was just getting started, and God help anyone who tried to stand in our way. Next chapter, chapter 42, she refuses him.